And I think obviously voting is a huge issue. That's step number 2. Make sure that we got the voting figured out right so that when we are this strong and we are the majority, that we actually win. And so, but then you get into public financing, and it's imperative that it overtake private financing of elections. Because, people say it's expensive. You know what's really expensive? When lobbyists go to Washington and spend a couple of dollars and get billions back, get trillions back. That's really expensive.
Yep.
If we spend just a little bit of money to finance all of the elections, then instead of all the politicians listening to the lobbyists, to the special interests, to the moneyed interests, then they'll be listening to us because we'll be the boss. And so in the long term, I don't think there's a bigger issue.
Excellent point, Chair. Let me just talk to format for just a second. If anybody, I'm going to toss these questions out. I'm going to toss them to each one of you, just kind of, randomly, however it is. And if anybody else wants to jump in, just jump in. If you want to, argue with that point or add to that point or hallelujah. Or,
I'm used to being on Fox
News.
Can I just call people an idiot?
That's right. Yeah. So, but this raises a larger question, and that is the whether or not the Democratic Congress has the courage to undertake something like public financing of elections. Ed, you get a lot of these guys on your show. What's your take on whether the Democratic Party is going to go down the road that the Green Party, for example, has gone down for a long time talking about public financing of elections, or are they as addicted to big money as the Republican Party is, just in a different way?
Well, thank you, Tom, and I want to thank all the wonderful listeners at 1090 here in Seattle. It's been a great market for our show, as it has been for all of us, and it's really one of the benchmark markets in the country for us, and I certainly appreciate all of your support. Now, thank you. Now, I thought this question was going to come up tonight. So I thought I'd wear a suit and tie and try to look presidential, because if you give me the money, I'll run for the White House. I don't think the Republicans would touch this subject with a 10-foot pole. I think they like the 2% crowd filtering the money into the pockets of the politicians and keeping it the way it is. I do see a cultural shift taking place in the country. I do believe that if the Democrats were to get the full power of the Senate, that they would more than seriously address this. We got to get back to America where the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker still has a chance to be into this government for the people. And I feel very confident that if the Democrats were able to win enough elections around the country, and I think it can happen, beyond the 60 mark in the Senate and a solid majority in the House, I think that the progressive movement is strong enough and there's enough liberal thought in the Congress, if that were to happen, that they would actually seriously address public financing the way it needs to be and to get the mud ranking out of the system.
So, Tom, can I jump in there? Look, we get Democrats on the show all the time, and there's some strong ones, Waxman, Conyers, Tim Ryan of Ohio, and they fight and they do a good job. But I got to say, overall, a lot, and good people. We had Ken Conrad of North Dakota on Friday's show. He's a good senator, understands the budget real well, and you could sense talking to him that he's a good guy, but tepid, okay? And I don't mean just Ken Conrad. I mean to all the Democrats, okay? And, and it's like you got to push him, and you got to push him, and you got to push him. And that's why when I say public financing is going to take 20, 30 years, it's because the system is already established, and they're already taking the money in from those people.
Yeah, but
it's hard
we
to
can't
topple
wait.
that.
We can't wait 20 or 30 years.
Well,
Mike, how do you make that kind of change happen?
In the first place, what has corrupted the system, I think, to, if not 100%, to a large extent, is the electronic advertising, television ads. Yeah. You eliminate television ads, and I don't know how you do this. Corporate America, the telecommunications business, is not going to cut off such a cash cow as political advertising. But why does Obama need 100 million? Why does Hillary need 100 million? Why do any of these candidates need 100, 150 million for television? And my theory, which will never happen because it is anachronistic and it belongs in a different century, but that is to eliminate that sort of advertising. Now, you can't do it because for obvious reasons, but if somebody wants to approach me and get my vote, come to my civic association, my PTA meeting, my Boy Scout troop, and talk to me. Don't hit me with that 30 and 60-second bullshit on television, because I'm not interested. I'm sorry. I promised I wouldn't do that. I'm sorry. I promised Stephanie I wouldn't cuss in front of her. There I go.
You know what, Mike?
She was very concerned about this.
Yes, she
Mike,
was.
at this point, I say fuck that. You know what? Seriously, this is like the latest that Malloy and I have ever been sober. So it's like 1,000 degrees up here. I want to start by saying that I think first we need to get Bush and Cheney out of office. Oh, did someone say that?
Yeah.
No, I agree with you, though, about having people on. I'm having the crazy guy from Alaska on Monday. The guy from the Flintstones. Yeah, Mr. Gravel. Senator Gravel is going to be on. And we've had Ron Paul on just because I felt sorry for him because that Republican debate. Yeah. Wasn't the Republican debate like Lord of the Flies? I thought someone was going to kill him with a rock. And he was the only one speaking any sort of, truth. But, I think it's encouraging, like, how many small donors Barack Obama has. Mama's for Obama until Monday, and then I'll flip-flop and be for the crazy guy from Alaska. But, and I think, and Al Franken, our buddy, is getting a lot of small donors in Minnesota. And, so, I think there is a real desire to have this country belong to the people again in some way.
Yeah, Franken's...
Yeah!
Yeah. Well, just apropos of that, I'll do a very quick story. Louise and I were watching TV one night. This was running up to the 2004 election, and Howard Dean had been on the cover of every magazine, Time, and it was that week when he was riding high. And he was on Hardball with Chris Matthews. And Chris says, what do you think should be done about the media? And I'm paraphrasing from memory here, but this is awful close. He says, what do you think should be done about the media? And Howard Dean says, I think that the giant conglomerates should probably be broken up, or at least shouldn't be allowed to be owned by companies that aren't in the media. And there was this pause, and Matthew says, wait a minute, GE owns this network. You're talking about GE not being able to own NBC, and Howard Dean goes, yeah, break it up.
And right then, GE shut the lights out.
Well, right then,
See.
I turned to Louise and I said, this is the last good word about Howard Dean you're going to hear on radio or television. That's right. And it was true. The next day, they were attacking him on all three networks, and it was all downhill from there. It was like somebody flipped a light switch. It was so incredible to watch. And that's why I ask you, Ed, and you, Mike, in particular, and Ben, I'd like to get your take on this. Now, is it, how do we make the change? Frankly, I think it's just, at a grassroots level, but how do we make the change in a practical way so that we can actually have politics that works in this country?
I think we have to start, I hear something you don't hear ever on our show. I think Cenk is largely right. You were looking at there is not, Ed makes a terrific point that when we get to, if we can ever get to something approaching 60 senators and add a couple of reasonable Republicans, that you'd have a shot at passing.
Is that an oxymoron?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was just kidding. That's not going to happen. That you'd have a shot at something like that, except there isn't the political will among, I don't even think, a significant majority of the Democratic senators. So, Tom, you're right. We can't wait 20, 30, 40 years. But it's a process of starting to talk about it tonight and talking about it in 2008 and 12 and 16, because it's a long way away, and you're going to have to convince most of corporate America that there's going to be some benefit to them. I spent 8 years working in local television, and our news director and our sales manager, the degree to which they'd get excited around election time, they were bouncing off the walls. They were sexually harassing women more than usual. It was they'd never been happier because all that money is coming in, and the notion that they're somehow going to sort of lay low while a Democratic majority decides that we're going to have public financing and campaigns, it's simply not going to happen.
Well, but the downside of that is that those ads are not always sold at the rates that normal advertising is. In some ways, the industry takes a hit during the election period.
No, at least in Charleston, South Carolina, Miami, when we were there, it was big. I'm sure it fluctuates.
It's probably changed. It's probably different from market. Ed, you wanted to...
I think that we spend quite a bit of time in Washington, and we do talk a lot to the senators. I think there's an undercurrent in the Senate that their